Hi, I'm Todd Rosenbluth, Head of Research at Vetify, and I'm excited to be here at the next ETF 360 talking with Simeon Hyman of ProShares about ONLN. Simeon, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So shopping online was becoming a hit before the pandemic, but then we've really started to see this accelerate. What are you seeing?
So let's put some context behind this. Just before the pandemic, e-commerce accounted for about 12% of retail sales in the US. It jumped to 17% in the lockdown. It's now down to 14%. Now, the trajectory before the pandemic, it was growing about 1% a year. So if we were 12% 2 years ago and 14 and change today, we're pretty much back on that original trend line, which is pretty darn good growth. I mean, think about it. Even if retail sales are flat, you're talking about 30-40% increase in e-commerce sales over the next 4 or 5 years.
Certainly. Now, one of the big things that happened that typically drives online spending is Amazon's Prime Day, which is this time taking place in July. Historically, what kind of impact has that had on online spending?
What's old is new again or not new again in retail. Just because it's online doesn't mean it's an idea that's never been around. I mean, we've had the Nordstrom anniversary sale for Lord knows how long, Macy's one-day sale. You try to get stuff going on in the summer before the back-to-school season starts because people are generally not shopping unless you do something. So that's a little bit of old school background. If we think about Prime Day in the context of Amazon's business, they did about $11 billion last year. That equates to, and even if you back out cloud, that equates to about maybe 10 to 12 average sales days for Amazon. So let's not go too crazy about its sort of absolute impact in terms of sales, but certainly as an indicator, as a marketing activity to get new Prime users, it's important, but balanced in its importance.
Well, let's balance also that this is a global phenomenon, not just a US one. Well, who are some of the global giants within the online spending world?
I'll give you a couple of key examples. Of course, Alibaba is one of them. And by the way, go look at the stock price. It's actually just barely in the green this year. The Chinese government has backed off of some of the stuff that was putting a cloud around the Chinese e-commerce players. So that's an important one. Also, SEA, I think you don't pronounce it C, but it's actually the biggest e-commerce player in Southeast Asia. And many of the folks who are kind enough to join us here also may be familiar with Mercado Libre, which is the big player in Latin and South America. So there are indeed key global players beyond just Amazon.
Well, all of this comes together in the ProShares Online ETF, ONLN. Talk about that one.
So ONLN is ProShares Online Retail ETF, and it is a global portfolio. And by the way, it's not so hard to ID online retailers because they kind of are descendants from a classification standpoint of the old catalog companies. So you don't have to pull out your AI and do word searches. It's pretty easy to say who's an e-commerce player. And the portfolio in the index is global. It's 25% ex-US, 75% US. And the rule is you have to have at least $500 million in market cap. And indeed, the portfolio itself is market cap weighted. It's got a cap in there, so you'll never see Amazon bigger than $24,999. But if there's any business where scale matters, it's online retail. So you got to acknowledge that the bigger you are and the bigger your market cap, you should have a bigger piece in the portfolio.
So lastly, Simeon, how does ONLN fit into a potential investor's portfolio?
There are a couple of ways to think about it. It can certainly be a thematic satellite. Lots of folks have been using more narrower ETFs like ONLN as those key thematic satellites, and that's certainly one deployment. But we've also seen folks use it for their consumer discretionary sleeve. Just about every stock in ONLN is in the consumer discretionary sector, and look, right now you're talking about a substantial discount. So ONLN is trading at just 40% of the price to book of the consumer discretionary sector. Brick and mortar retail is now trading at parity to online retail. which is almost 2.5 times its relative valuation. So this may be a very interesting entry point, and it could be a position one would consider as a sector sleeve in your portfolio as an alternative to the more sort of obvious thematic satellite that one might use it as. Either would be great.
Thanks, Simeon. Great insight as always. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to ETF 360. Till next time.